let's not forget, I mean, during COVID, when we needed migrant workers, we allowed international students and others to, to work longer hours, right? So, I mean, the basis of the Canadian economy, the fundamental sectors, think of food services, think of trucking, meat packing, all this kind of stuff, industrial work. Um, all of this is, done by migrant labor of one sort of or another. I can't forget food production as well, right? If the U.S. was once talking about annexing Canada, right, and taking over Canadian sovereignty, the provisions for greater surveillance in this bill really sort of moves in that same direction, at least in terms of information sovereignty, right? Data sovereignty. I mean, so much for elbows up, right, and standing up to the U.S. Yeah, no, I mean, Bill 2 is another one of these very concerning bills. If a conservative government was passing a bill to someone, I had read in an article that this would be, Stephen Harper's dream to pass a bill like this. I mean, whether that's true or not, Bill 2 is a very concerning bill. It's called the Strong Borders Act, or at least it's colloquially called the Strong Borders Act. Um, very Trumpian language there. Um, I mean, that's enough to concern people.
Well, this one's kind of like a two-parter too. Not officially. I imagine it is broken down into chapters. We'll link the actual bills so you don't have to take our word on any of this. You can read it for yourself. But a lot of folks came out against it as a mass deportation bill. It's an anti-migrant bill. I mean, I say they came out as rightfully so, factually so. It is. But it also raises huge concerns over mass surveillance. So I guess like let's break it down in that way. First, you know, it was one of Carney's first bills. And I think that's why it made it so alarming because we were in the throes of watching the ICE raids, or we still are, uh, early days. But we knew it was coming and it was going to get ugly. And then here we are, the Canadian bleeding heart liberals, and their first priority was to pass something that was going to make it even harder for people to seek asylum coming through the United States. There's a lot of things wrong with that bill, but just that alone should get you really riled up. The fact that we should have done away with a third party safe third party agreement with the United States long ago. I've said it a million times on our show. Amnesty International has been calling for that agreement to be fixed or scrapped for years, long before internment camps for migrants. Okay, like long before that, we knew it was not safe. But now it's almost nearly impossible to come through the United States and claim asylum in Canada. And I'm here to shit on Carney, but this is a continuation of Trudeau's policies, right? That still today see 3,000 people lose their status in Canada every single day right now, right? And migrant rights warned us that 1 million people would eventually lose their status in Canada because of the changes the Liberals made, which means they've got to leave or they've got to stay undocumented. And this feeds into that even more. So now the minister, again, a consolidation of power here in another department. The minister of immigration holds incredible power here, not just on single cases, you know, how we appeal to them to do the right thing, to not deport environmental activists, blah, blah, blah. And we can make it case by case. But now they can make sweeping changes to immigration policies that would essentially mass deport groups of people, say from a certain country or with certain criteria. Who knows what doors that opened? And that goes on the books for any government to use down the road, as do all these things, right? If you're like, oh, but it's just the Liberals using it, they're going to use this to build wind farms and just stop fentanyl from crossing the border. That's not true. But, you know, either way, these are things that will now become Canadian, right? What it means to be Canadian is to essentially turn migrants away. And I, I feel so bad for migrant rights groups because at the beginning of Trudeau's reign, he promised them status for all, right? He promised that he would roll out that, and he did for some groups. There were some gains made, and then there was just this shift. And it was step back, scapegoating them for housing, this, that, and the other thing. And it's just been a completely different story for migrants in Canada. And that's just part of that bill.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're totally right about this, Jessa. One thing I maybe wanted to pick up on was how this is sort of a continuation of sort of the, the tail end of Trudeau's time as Prime Minister, or Trudeau's government, this noticeable kind of shift in the attitude toward migrants. I mean, let's not forget, I mean, during COVID, when we needed migrant workers, we allowed international students and others to, to work longer hours, right? So, I mean, the basis of the Canadian economy, the fundamental sectors, think of food services, think of trucking, meat packing, all this kind of stuff, industrial work. Um, all of this is, done by migrant labor of one sort of or another. I can't forget food production as well, right? Agricultural goods, etc. Um, Coming back to how this is sort of a continuation of the Trudeau legacy, um, I would say it is, and it's also not, right? Because on one side, it is sort of continuing the legacy of turning against migrants for a country that, boasts its, migration and multicultural credentials. But it's also, I would say, different in the sense that this is really, a reaction to, again, the Trump regime. Whereas Trudeau's, right, was in the dying days of the Trudeau Liberal government, where the Liberals were polling very low, and the Conservatives were gaining ground on questions of immigration. I mean, you saw this also on social media. A lot of the proliferation of a lot more anti-immigrant, anti-South Asian as well kind of sentiment. The Conservatives were capitalizing on this. The Liberals under Trudeau thought they could undercut the Conservatives, by repositioning. I'm sure there were economic considerations as well that drove that policy forward. This is really, I mean, a huge step forward or backward, depending on how you see it, a huge step forward in
Backward,
terms of
backward.
backward. I mean, a huge step backward in terms of, you know, what I'm trying to say is that it's a big step from Trudeau's immigration policy, cracking down a lot harder. And I think the move here really is to, again, capitulate to the US to protect, to shield, quote unquote Canadian interest to some extent, read, Canadian capital. To shield them to some extent, by capitulating.
You've definitely got a point. Like it's definitely hit a different speed and a different tone, and Carney set that tone. Like Trudeau did it with a smiling face and did try to pretend it was solely about fentanyl, right? Like he wasn't trying to play into, but we also have to remember that Trump isn't the beginning of the anti-migrant, the detention, the deportations either. These were pressures the U.S. had been leaning on us probably for some time. And it's not just led to us spending a lot of money at the border, which Trudeau made sure that we were promised to do. On top of that, we're leasing U.S. Black Hawk helicopters to do it. So we're just like, they are very intertwined. You'll know this when you cross the border, especially at an airport, right? We've got U.S. Customs here at our airports, and the way border services work together, which kind of ties into the rest of this bill, is very tied with the U.S., right? Like these agencies work very closely together for years. So Carney pretends like I love this. At the same time, he's trying to pretend that we've got to do everything possible, strip everyone's rights to protect ourselves from the US. But at the same time, when it comes to our border or the military spending, it's just like we're good. It's like there's no threat at all to do this, to have our border services intertwined like that, and to give the US even more power to intrude on Canadian rights, right? Like the second part of this bill is it's surveillance, and it gives enhanced powers to CSIS, to the folks that check the mail when it comes across the border, and
To the
telecom
police as well.
companies. Yeah, like it gives U.S. companies the ability to make requests of service providers here in Canada that essentially give them warrantless access to whose databases we're on and who knows what else, right? Because
I should
even
say, Jessa,
yeah,
at this point in the bill, what the bill seems to be suggesting is it's going to give Canadian law enforcement that power, but at least at this point as it stands, it leaves the door open for data sharing and things like that with the US. So, at least at this point, it seems like that's not in the bill, but it leaves the door open, and that's sort of the point that I was. Sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
It does leave the door open, but it also includes protection for service providers should they provide more than what they were mandated to do. So it's almost like they've
Right,
told these service providers, like, you give the cops whatever they ask for. You give too much, we won't ever punish you for that. Because obviously they've been in negotiation with these telecom companies, right? What they're capable of doing and whatnot. So they'll hand over your whole file.
right.
And yeah,
And
but it go on. Yeah.
I was going to say this is the point that I was sort of coming to in terms of how this is sort of uh, the way that this is different from the Trudeau era is that it is sort of reacting to the Trump regime in a way that it's trying to harmonize, because borders and immigration and so-called crime is such a big deal to Trump. Uh, you know, in trade negotiations, Jesus, trade negotiations, etc. This is something seen by the Carney government as something to move on, to to come to a better agreement. One of Canada's, I guess, chips, negotiating chips. But the move here is really to integrate, or at least it seems to be to integrate our sort of immigration law enforcement systems, such that you if the US was once talking about annexing Canada, right, and taking over Canadian sovereignty, the provisions for greater surveillance in this bill really sort of moves in that same direction, at least in terms of information sovereignty, right, data sovereignty. It leaves the door open for the US to effectively have some level of sovereignty over Canadian residents' data. So I mean, so much for elbows up, right, and standing up to the US.
And securing our sovereignty. That was a word thrown around a whole lot, even when they were giving like land acknowledgments. It was, yeah, he's a complete contradiction, Carney. Although he did spell it out, the narratives he's using to justify all of this flip from one end to the other. There's no consistency, but there's also not a lot of pushback going. Like, that's a thing when you allow a party to get a new leader too, and then everyone tried so hard to get him elected. So there's got to be this kind of grace period that not only do they give new leaders just to see how it all shapes out, like give them the benefit of the doubt, but it's also for their saving face as well. Like, how fast can you then turn around and start complaining about the man you told your neighbors to all go vote for, right? So, yeah, there's this deep contradictions that just seem so obvious to everybody who's paying attention. But that's the key word, like, who's paying attention. Bill C-2 did, though, mobilize a lot of people. I'm looking at a letter here signed by acknowledging that 300 different organizations demanded a complete withdrawal of Bill C-2, and it's a who's who of migrant rights, civil liberties groups, labor organizations. Obviously, I can't read them all, but I'll link that letter from openmedia.org. And it's uh, it's incredible that it was the very first bill, but probably the least amount of controversy over. I think a lot of people are talking more about NATO and the promised military spending, perhaps, than they are the actual bills that have been passed. And you kind of mentioned it earlier, but it's hard when there's legislation like this and he's going to reign this way because although, 7 seats is not a lot for the NDP and you do have the bloc there, this is legislation that the majority of MPs will just be gleeful to pass, and challenging through the electoral system. I think is going to be a bit of a lost cause for people under Carney's reign. So, I mean, everything we've talked about requires a lot of spending. These infrastructure projects and the surveillance and border security, and we're going to get into military spending. All of this is going to lead to massive austerity as well. I like that wasn't in our summary of points to get to, but I think it's an important to note that even, your parliamentary budget officer has come out and said, like, whoa, you're going to have massive cuts to the public sector in order to accomplish this. And sure enough, Carney has issued orders that we saw Rob Ford give, really go to every single department except for the D&D, right? Except for the military, and say, cut 10 to 15% of your budget. I don't give a shit where you get it. I don't care what the social impact is. I don't care. Just you cut that budget because we've got to spend on war, and tax cuts, but a lot on war.